Hello and welcome back to this damn Palladialistic Crusade. This is another sort of, I guess, editorial or open-ended sort of unscripted discussion. But I did want to express some of my thoughts about Warner's new release of the original Superman films on 4K UHD and a new 4K remastering project that was done. Very similar to how they finally revisited the Batman films, the original 4 Batman films on 4K UHD with brand new masters. And unfortunately, like the release of those films, this Superman set is being sold in a set of the films. They're not being sold or listed as individually available yet, although they are being sold that way in other countries. And it's also available in a deluxe limited collector's steelbook set, which is already sold out most places. But the Superman set is not just problematic like the Batman films were, but has already been found to be plagued with a number of errors that are extremely glaring, extremely problematic, and really suggests that Warner doesn't really care about things like, archival presentation or quality control. Their quality control is non-existent, and they prove this time and time again with their releases. But when you get to a case like this where the problems are so glaring and so noticeable that people saw them and experienced them on the first release of these 4K masters on streaming services before the actual disc started coming out in different countries, because the release date's a little staggered, and started saying things and started even posting on Twitter or on forums, and the discussion continued. People found more and more things, and then more and more problems, and more things that cause very dedicated fans of these films to really feel some sense of disquiet. Then it becomes another issue entirely. So unfortunately, I have major issues with this, because not only are the problems very obvious, very in your face, but they have seemingly paid more attention to having a fancy steelbook package and the release of this at a higher price point than the actual presentation of the films themselves, and making sure that it's done to the best of their ability and using the full extent of the actual disc format, the 4K UHD format. This is part and parcel with the Warner Studio operations of the studio label. They've always been this way, but it's gotten increasingly worse over time. And since this is no longer the home video boom of the DVD era, their cost-cutting measures and lesser encodes and not always having the best audio or presentation on Blu-ray is one thing. But now that we're in 4K UHD and they're doing new 4K scans, but then having the same level of zero quality control and now introducing errors and problems into these new scans, that's where we've now crossed over into, okay, this was bad before, but now you're going to do this, and it's with the Superman films? This is not some minor sort of release that most people are going to be unaware of. This is a major release that is getting a major push and being sold at major retailers, which is not common for a lot of releases now, because the physical media market has shrank to such a degree and Warner wants to focus only on streaming. This has problems like their DCAU animated series on Blu-ray have had. This has, the level of some errors and glaringly obvious problems that you find in the Batman the Animated Series box set that I reviewed. And unfortunately, some of those made it into the Superman animated series box set and Batman Beyond, which I will review later on this channel. But to see these problems now happen with the Superman set, it begs the question, are they going to correct this? Are they going to admit their obvious mistakes and their lack of care and attention to detail with these films? Once again, because they've had many issues in the past on various home masters, which is why I have most of the different format releases, as I do all of the Batman films. I have all the format releases of those. But they have done some recalls in the past. They did so for the Mad Max films because they claimed to have original audio and didn't, and then for some reason they listened to people for a second and did a recall program and did put some version of an older audio track on there and then reissued them. But, of course, they did not do this for the Batman films, which I'm still mad at them about, and that makes those releases pretty much worthless to me. As a great fan of those, I can't stand the remixes they did. Those do not have any form of their original audio track for any of the 4 films. But here, the issues are not just in the audio realm. They kind of run the gamut. Oliver Harper did a video review of the set and did actually go over a lot of the known issues to date in detail. And honestly, with the way they've been turning up, I'm pretty sure there's probably some more that just haven't been found yet. It seems like you'll have to sort of comb through the 4 films to just try and figure out what all is going on. But essentially, what has happened is that Warner did go and make brand new 4K scans, and the scans themselves are technically far beyond anything we've seen or had before, which is great. However, we were led to believe that they were going to be using a newer master of the original film, which was the only released on 4K UHD before this point. But it was an earlier disc, and any sort of early disc, when a studio first jumps into a new format, is bound to have some issues. If you look at any early DVD, if you look at any early Warner Blu-ray, they're very problematic. They have all the issues that were common to studio's first couple of disc releases, and they eventually worked the kinks out. And so if you compare a Blu-ray from 2007 or 2006 even to a Blu-ray from 2010 or 2015, there's going to be a massive difference. Not as massive because it's Warner and they cut corners wherever possible and they have zero quality control, but you can still tell the difference in terms of the encoding type and actually having lossless audio, and not just being a crappy Blu-ray port of an HD DVD encode, which is the vast majority of early Warner Blu-rays. And of course, you have to remember that every Warner HD DVD by this point is rotted to hell and back because they suffer from the dreaded Warner disc rot problem, which also affected, unfortunately, a good chunk of their DVD catalog, which I have gone over in this video. So the Warner quality control problem is a long-standing one. It's not a new thing, but it just keeps getting worse, it seems. But instead of getting the supposed new master of, or new approach to redoing the color timing of the Superman the movie 4K master, we've instead been given a new version of that same 2018 release, which is problematic in its color grading. It's, obviously a new 4K scan, so it's better technically, but it has a lot of weirdness going on. It even has an error in the credits, which people have noticed. So that error has carried over to this new disc release. Apparently, it has been fixed for the theatrical DCP of the film from the 4K master, but they didn't think it was important to fix it for the disc release. So not only did we not get the newer and corrected sort of grading on a newer version of the 4K master of the original film like we were led to believe, but honestly, even worse, and what really got to me, and I don't know why this was done. This is appallingly stupid on Warner's part. The 2018 UHD was most important for finally having a version of the film's 70mm mix. It was only in Lossy 5.1, but the film has a very notoriously poor Dolby Stereo mix. I've even heard it theatrically. I've seen a print of Superman with the Dolby Stereo track. This is the very flat-sounding stereo track that you find on the later DVDs. You can matrix it out, but it is a notoriously poor mix. It is basically more like a flat stereo mix with just a little bit of ambiance and a little bit of sound that moves a tiny bit simply because it wasn't really mixed well in the first place. And when you finally get to hear the 70mm mix, it's like hearing the film for the first time. It's an amazing mix for the time. It also had 2 versions. Famously, Superman was the first film to have a split stereo surround mix. This was thought for a long time to only have been used as a test mix, and that theaters were too scared to use it or didn't think it would work or so on and so forth. But it has come to light more recently that it perhaps did get some theatrical engagements. Very few screenings, but apparently it did get shown to an audience. But the main 70mm mix was with a traditional mono surround. That is actually what turned up on the 1990 Laserdisc, the letterbox Laserdisc I have here. And when I first heard this for the first time years ago, I couldn't believe it. It was finally an original mix of Superman that sounded great and like I always thought the film should sound, but wasn't the terrible special edition 5.1 mix with all the new effects that just take you right out of the film because it's, unfortunately gimmicky and was done in 2000. So for years, this was my go-to because I always thought it had to be the 70mm mix. The film did also have a custom mono mix made, which probably does does have maybe a difference or two, and there were prints made with this mono track. So the film technically has 4 original audio tracks, like most from the late 70s, early 80s, that had multiple sound mixes custom made for the individual sound processes. This is something else that is unfortunately lost to time, and most people have no idea, and studios are not concerned with preserving the audio history of a film, unfortunately. So for years, the letterbox laserdisc is what I steered people towards, and I thought it was absolutely amazing. I figured it had to be the 70mm mix because I couldn't explain it otherwise, and it was just presented in matrixed form, and somebody must have grabbed the wrong tape or listened to it themselves and thought it sounded great and just used it for the laserdisc. That stuff could happen back then, and of course there's no notes on it, so you're just having to guess and compare it to whatever else you can find. So you come to the 2018 UHD, and when it turned up with this lossy 5.1 track that was labeled as, as the 70mm mix, I couldn't believe it. And it is the same as the Laserdisc, but it seems to have a split stereo surround image. So it is presumed to be that split surround mix that was maybe shown once or twice and otherwise not used. That's so historically important. So in spite of the color grading issues and the issues in the master and it not being perfect, that disc was worth its weight in gold for having that, even though it was not properly restored and only in a lossy 5.1 codec. You were finally getting it in discrete form, and it did seem to be the split surround version, which is so incredibly historically important because, of course, this even predates Apocalypse Now by a year, which famously sort of broke the idea of stereo surround to the masses. Of course, that disc also carried a lossless version of a reconformed version of the terrible special edition remix with all the new effects and stuff, so I would just tell people to ignore that. But anyway, what Warner has done is taken that disc, not given us the so-called corrected or version 2 edition of the 4K master. It's exactly the same, but it has been reconfigured slightly in terms of the subtitle options and the language options. They have removed the 70mm 5.1 track and instead replaced it with what seems to be the same version of the very flat, notoriously poor theatrical Dolby Stereo that was on the Anthology Blu-ray of the theatrical cut. This is a major step backwards. Both mixes, really all 4 original mixes should be on a release of Superman on 4K UHD. And if you want the special edition mix, you should keep it with the special edition cut because it does not really belong, historically, it does not belong with the theatrical cut. So a UHD should be released of their so-called corrected version we were led to believe would be here, but it should include all 4 versions of the original sound mixes, all 4 sound mixes, I should say, properly restored in lossless quality. And at the very least, if you can't get Warner to spring for that it should include both the 70mm mix, which is the best sounding version of the film, period, and the very flat, notoriously poor Dolby Stereo that just sounds like flat stereo, and it is what it is. Again, I would like to see the mono included as well, and I would like to see both versions of the 70mm mix included for historical purposes, and then people could learn more about the history of sound development in film sound, but, Warner's gonna Warner. They don't care about original audio. So that already is a major red flag, and you have to hang on to your 2018 disc, or you have to go and try and find it, because Warner has quietly replaced new copies. If you order it from Amazon or somewhere, people have even shared this. It is this new disc in the standalone case. It's the new disc found in this box set without the 70mm mix, even though the box art is the same and says it has a 5.1 track. So you have to actually go and find a copy of the UHD. You have to scrutinize the copyright date, but that doesn't really help. You have to actually look at the disc label itself, and people have shown that the new disc label has some different logos on it. So you have to ensure that your UHD that you order online or you buy in a store or something does not have a modern Dolby logo on it. That's the best indicator we know of so far to know that you have the original disc if it does not have a Dolby logo, a new Dolby logo on the UHD disc itself. So that is a gigantic problem and really has me hopping mad because, for the first time we had a version of the 70mm mix, and now Warner has says, nope, that's not important. We don't care. But here we're giving you the stereo track back that doesn't sound good at all. Who knows? Again, we were led to believe it was going to be a new version of the 4K Master fixing and addressing some of the issues. It's not. It's the same disc, but they've now made the audio worse and removed the one great element of the 2018 disc, which I find absolutely insane. So that's Superman 1. Then move on to Superman 2. Beautiful new 4K scan, technically better than anything we've seen before. But unfortunately, the audio remix in Atmos has been already found to have problems with pitch in several places. The music cues have issues. There's some, I think, also some noise and other problems. So essentially, the audio track has defective moments in it. That in and of itself should warrant a recall, but apparently the HDR new color grading is a bit iffy in places, and people have reported it looking kind of weird. And if that wasn't enough, apparently it's been let out or noted that they apparently have let a less experienced colorist work on Superman 2, and that's why it doesn't look as good as 3 and 4, which had a more experienced colorist working on it. And if that is indeed the case, that is just insane. I mean, you know, on top of that, you would think if they had a less experienced person, they wouldn't just hand them Superman 2 to grade. It is a major film that people, you know, have loved for generations. And if you were going to let the less experienced person work on any of the 4 films, why wouldn't it be Superman 4, which is notoriously a cheap Canon production and had its budget taken away and was a very compromised film and is never going to look as good as the other 3 films. He also shot it with cheaper lenses. You know, it was very compromised. And it's also the least popular of the 4 films. I don't know why you wouldn't have your experienced people working on all 4 films, because this is a major release. But anyway, if that's true, that just is even more of a confusing head scratcher. What is going on at the Warner Studio label? So this does have audio issues. It does have HDR and color grading issues that are different to what is in the first film's 4K master, and does not exist apparently in the UHD of 3 and 4. So that's thankfully a problem you don't face with the last 2 films. But that just seems bizarre that they would do that. And on top of that, it does seem to retain the same 5.1 track from the anthology Blu-ray. But the anthology 5.1 for both Superman 2 and 3, some Superman fans have said that they're kind of disappointed with them, or that they have a few errors here and there. And some have even said that the 5.1s and the DVD and the Blu-ray for 2 and 3 are supposedly based on the 70mm mixes of the films. That may be possible, but it's never been confirmed anywhere to my knowledge. And I know when I play Superman 2 and 3 on the Laserdisc editions, which have matrixed PCM 2.0, they're most likely being based on the Dolby Stereo mixes for those films, and I do actually kind of think they sound better in some ways than the 5.1s. They always seem to be a bit fuller, even though they're matrix audio and not discrete. So I don't necessarily know what the source of the 5.1 mixes are, but I've never been super happy about how the 5.1 mixes of Superman 2 and 3 have sounded on home video and DVD and Blu-ray so far. So the fact that they were getting remixed yet again, I wasn't really, you know, I don't like remixing. I think it's really an important practice that needs to end. But, you know, I have no faith in Warner's ability to remix a film, as I can go into on the Batman film. So I just expected it to be something like that. But I didn't expect it to be full of errors. So that in and of itself seems to warrant a recall. If the problems on Superman 2 weren't bad enough, the iconic ending shot of Superman doing the flyby across the camera that is repeated from Superman 1, and Chris Reeve smiles at the camera and the hairs on the back of your neck stand up, that has been screwed up. It automatically goes to a squashed image ratio. The actual shot is squashed and is thus distorted. So that has somehow gotten goofed up, and, you know, one of the most iconic Superman images of all time is now distorted on the UHD presentation of Superman 2. So that's another reason why that disc should be recalled and has a glaring issue in it. It's the very last shot of the film you screwed up. Again, their QC seems to be non-existent. The Donner cut of Superman 2 is a separate presentation. We knew it was going to be problematic because in 2006 when they did it, it was done for DVD primarily. The effects were extremely limited to CGI on a low budget in 2006. They had practically, it was such a minuscule budget, it was almost non-existent, and so it was always going to be compromised. It does seem to be better than we thought it would be, and some have said that they might have scanned a 35 millimeter film out that was made of the Donner cut and used that, and then of course the effects are going to be upscaled further to 4K. That might explain why it actually looks pretty good, but also that means you can tell the difference in the color timing of the Donner cut versus this new Superman 2 4K master, which seems to kind of be a bit all over the place in its grading being inconsistent. So I think that might further show up the color inconsistency in the theatrical 4K master. Then you get to Superman 3, which is probably the best looking overall in terms of, it has probably the healthiest negative. It had a significant budget behind it, unlike 4. They had worked out the kinks and the effects work, and it's always looked rather healthy on home video, and this is probably going to be the best looking of the UHD transfers and the one without some sort of crazy problem going on that we're yet aware of. So even though I don't approve of remixes and I wish it would have all the theatrical audio options present and all the different mixes, Superman 3 on UHD is probably going to be the only one that I think somebody like myself could live with, and it doesn't seem to have any crazy problem that we know of as of yet. And then we come to Superman 4, which seems to be a film that, Warner has never put anything into in terms of they just scan it for a new format and they release it as is. It's always had a Matrix 2.0 stereo mix. It's never been upmixed to even 5.1 before. It's not a film most people are fans of, although I think it tries as hard as it can. It was just an extraordinarily compromised production. It's also never been seen in its original edit outside of a test screening. The deleted scenes that were presented and scanned for DVD are all in the raw and rough form, and Warner Archive has tried to find more Superman 4 missing pieces, and George Felsenstein has said that if they can, they will do a reconstruction, but unfortunately it doesn't seem likely since the elements are not known to exist, and they just have what has been used for the main studio releases. But they are still actively searching, and they will do it if they can, much like their presentation of the extended TV version of the original film. So when you turn to the UHD of Superman 4, it is always going to be the theatrical cut, and you would not expect it to look that good. But with this new 4K scan, and again, apparently have the same person who graded the Superman 3 master, a lot of people are raving at how good it looks and how unexpected it is that Superman 4 suddenly looks so good. It is still an analog film shoot. It was still shot and presented in 35mm. It's always going to have some baseline level of quality, even though anyone can tell that it was a compromised film and they had their budget taken away, and you can see the pain in everyone's faces that, they're having to still soldier on and make this. So that's why I find it such a film to at least suffer along with the participants and bemoan the fact that they were stuck doing this. And I do think it is actually a better film than Superman 3, but that's just my own personal opinion in spite of the problems. But the issue here is not in the image. The issue is in the fact that Warner has decided to finally remix Superman 4, which I didn't really care for because I don't care for remixes at all, and I have no respect for Warner's ability to remix a film because they've shown time and time again that they don't care about film audio and preserving the proper original audio experience. But this is the major problem of the set. They have gone in and for this Atmos track, either used alternate takes of Alexander Courage's score for the film, which was what most people agreed the best element of the film. The best part of the film was the score. And when you start the film from the main titles, you can tell something is terribly wrong. The music sounds bad, and it seems to have errors in it. And apparently there was a recording session done first that was deemed not good enough, and the score was re-recorded at a later date at a different studio with a different orchestra. So it's been rumored or thought that maybe they used those original takes of the score in mistake because they have no quality control. Some have wondered, maybe did they only use part of a multi-track master? Did they just screw it up in the mixing somehow because, again, they have no quality control? It is unknown, but unfortunately, the new presentation of Superman 4 has this hideously compromised audio presentation where the score is made ineffectual, almost sounds like it has errors and spots. It sounds like you're listening to a degraded re-recording of the score in places. It is not how this film should be experienced. It's not how the score should be experienced, which again was sort of the saving grace of the film for a lot of Superman fans. And it is, a disrespecting the legacy of Alexander Courage's work, who was a great composer, and this is a rather wonderful score. So this should be the subject of a recall. If anything in the set should be the subject of a recall. So to be quite honest, in terms of this set, I think that really Superman 1, Superman 2, and Superman 4 should be the subject of a recall. And while you're at it, all of the original audio options should be fully restored and presented on disc for all 4 films. So, while you're at it, I think you should just fix everything across the board and do the work that should have been done in the first place. So why am I making this video, and why do I not have the set on the shelf behind me? It's because I am not going to support work like this until Warner announces that they're going to address these problems and do the work correctly like they should have in the first place, in spite of the great new work in terms of the new scans being technically advanced. I'm not going to support work that is this problematic for the rather high list price they have it at. The standard set is right around $100, and then the Steelbook was about $140, $150. And on top of that, the Blu-rays that are included are not new masters. They are the same as the anthology sets. So you already have these, and they do still have the same color issues with the newer masters made for this, which did introduce an unfortunate sort of teal wash in terms of the color timing, which was unfortunately very commonplace and standard to new Warner HD masters at the time, and this affects a lot of Warner titles to varying degrees, including the Blu-ray remasters of the Lethal Weapon films to a degree. Even Warner's Blu-ray of Get Carter has a little smidgen of it. And that's a problem. That's also a part of the Burton Batman films that I have a major problem with, specifically Batman Returns, which its 4K master is ruined by the inaccurate color grading. And I can say that because I have seen Warner Brothers' vaulted studio-held print, which they did loan out to an art house, and I did see it, and it came straight from Warner's vault, and it was an original 1992 Fuji release print, and it had none of the teal color problems that plague the UHD master and really bug the crap out of me because they are completely inaccurate. So to be honest, I don't feel like dropping $100 plus tax on a compromised release simply for the new UHD discs, which are problematic and flawed at best, and on some are, honestly, I think all of them should be recalled and these problems should be addressed. And I don't know about you, but I don't feel like dropping $100 or more on a set if someone's going to actually fix their problems and do a disc recall program. It was the same way with, not wanting to pick up the Mad Max set until they did their whole disc replacement program and released new editions, hopefully with the new corrected discs in them. There's been nothing said so far, nothing said officially, so I think it's best to wait until something is announced, and if they don't do anything, because the standard box set is merely individual cases shoved in a box, I think it's probably best to just purchase the individual releases later at a much lower price, and it's easier for your wallet, and then you have to try and fix the problems yourself, which is the same thing that happened on the Batman releases. These were brand new 4K scans. They're technically much better than anything we've ever gotten. However, the color timing on the Burton films, while they are finally darker as they should be because they were always brightened on home video before, There is a little bit of teal color timing creeping into 89. It's more so on the 1080p disc than the UHD, but it's a little bit there. But unfortunately, it's all over Returns, which has a lot of cold blues since the film is set around Christmas time in very chilly winter. I have seen, again, Warner's vaulted studio held archive print, an original 1992 Fuji stock print with which looked gorgeous. So I do know what the film is supposed to look like, and I did see that in the past couple of years, and I have seen every other version of the film, and none of them have the sort of teal wash all over the entirety of the film, which ruins the UHD presentation. But on top of that, all four films had an audio remix only with brand new effects. It has an Atmos track for each film. They do not have their original audio in any form. Most of these do have multiple different audio tracks, though not to the same mixing degree as the original Superman film, but those are not here in any way, shape, or form. So unfortunately, I never watched these, and I had to buy these individually, and then you have to sort of cobble together your own fan-made version without any problems. But on Returns, you're stuck trying to regrade the film yourself from memory, which is appalling. And this has never been addressed by Warner Brothers. They seem to think this is perfectly fine, and I'm pretty sure this is what they're going to do with the errors on the Superman set, even though they are extremely glaring. The other thing they might do is what they did on Batman the Animated Series with the episodes that had completely defective audio on the Blu-ray releases and was noticed by pretty much everyone who actually watches their discs that they purchase. Every fan noticed that the handful of episodes had horribly degraded audio with distortion, and they just sounded terrible. Nothing was ever said, but Warner has gone and quietly corrected them for the streaming versions. They did not do a disc recall program. They did not acknowledge the problem, but they went and fixed it so they wouldn't have people complain on streaming, because all they apparently care about are streaming services and then making a big fancy package so they can charge more and make collectors buy it, regardless of what the quality of the disc is inside and the presentation of the actual film or series. So that's why I am not supporting this sort of tomfoolery again from Warner Brothers. I don't feel like dropping over $100 for shoddy work that clearly is done by people who don't care, and they don't care about film preservation. They don't care about film history. They don't care about the films they're presenting. They cut corners everywhere. I think it's ridiculous that all standard Warner catalog UHDs are HDR10 only and still have audio problems and compression problems. So we're still facing some of the same problems that we saw with Warner cutting corners in the Blu-ray realm. And they are shown up by the small in-house archive division every single time. And in my opinion, the team at Warner Archive should have been put in charge of the entire home video library and the studio label years ago, because every single Warner Archive release is done to the best of their ability. They have a very minuscule budget, but they make sure that every single release has a maxed out bitrate and lossless audio and does not have technical problems to the best of their abilities. There's no reason why the major studio label can't do that. And again, the archive division shows them up at every turn. And to be honest, they should have been the ones doing this release, because they would actually put in the time and care to at least get the technical specifications right, which Warner, the studio label, once again did not. So this is yet another extremely problematic release of the Superman films, just like the Blu-ray anthology set, just like the DVD set before it, which did have notorious problems of its own. And now we have extremely glaring errors that apparently Warner is just going to try to ignore. So I do hope they announce a recall and replacement program. I hope they acknowledge their mistakes. I hope they don't just try to cover it up and like they did on Batman the Animated Series. And I hope they don't just ignore the audio problems and the color timing problems like they did on the Batman UHD releases. So that's why I am not purchasing this set until something happens. And if nothing is done, what I'll do is I'll have the 2018 UHD of the original film, and then I'll pick up the other films individually and spend less than what the pricey box set, which is really just a cardboard holder for the individual discs, and then I'll have to try and see about cobbling together my own corrected version of the disc that the studio once again could not properly do themselves because they have zero quality control. As you can tell, this gets me a little bit hot and bothered. I'm beyond frustrated with this type of incompetence being displayed continually. It is quite clear that a great number of studios do not care about their catalog titles outside of being able to monetize them, and all the focus seems to have been in the marketing of this release and the packaging and making some fancy steelbook set for collectors who want to drop $150 on a release. And the studio just didn't want to be bothered about presenting the films correctly. And every release of these films so far has had issues, but these are the type of issues they can't cover up because they're that much in your face, and they need to be addressed. They need to instigate a recall program and at the least fix the very obvious and in-your-face defects. And so that's why I would encourage people not to purchase this release and not to support this release, because it does not deserve your hard-earned money, especially at $100 or more, which is what the set is going for at retail. So again, if nothing is done, which is probably what I think Warner will do, because that's their sort of standard operating procedure, again, I'll just pick up the other releases individually, keep my 2018 UHD of Superman the movie, which everyone should do because that 70mm mix is worth its weight in absolute gold. Do not give up that disc, because I don't think Warner will ever bother with it again. I don't even think they know it exists because of their total incompetence, it seems. But yeah, I'll just pick up the other releases individually, and then I'll have to just, capture Laserdisc audio tracks and do comparisons. And as a lot of us do, you have to try and fix it yourself just for your own viewing experience, to have something with the best possible audio track and to not have problems, and essentially do the work that the studio should have done in the first place, and they didn't do it because they don't care. Case in point. So those are my thoughts on the Superman UHD set and why I think you should not purchase it and should not support this type of shoddy work with zero quality control and seemingly zero care for the proper presentation of classic and iconic films, and especially the Superman films, which are beloved by countless people and is, part of their DC library they so badly want to monetize. This is a major release. Why would you not spend the extra 5 minutes here and there to make sure you at least did things properly and correctly, even if you were just going to throw these 4K masters on a disc and call it a day? Why would you not include remastered brand new Blu-rays of these 4K masters like you did on the Batman releases? Why would the Superman set have random different original or older Blu-ray audio tracks when the Batman UHDs had none of those? Where's the sort of guidelines for any of your releases, Warner, at the studio label? I don't think you have any. Again, I'm just beyond tired of this, particularly coming from the Warner studio label, and to have this level of issues in a release and expect people to go pay $100 to $150 or more of their hard-earned money, and just for 5 new UHDs that all have various issues and things, and some of them this bad and this glaring, no, I'm not going to go along with this. And I think people need to seriously think about whether they should upgrade or not, and if Warner's going to announce a recall program and admit their errors and mistakes, which they rarely do. And if not, I think you should just wait, pick this up on sale, enjoy it for what you can, or do like me and try and cobble together your own version yet again due to studio incompetence. So that's how I feel in this situation. That's why I decided to make this into a video, because the more I read about it, the more I saw, and the more detailed reports I started seeing coming out with this type of these kinds of errors. It just gets me mad, and I'm so tired of this crap. It's ridiculous that I have to go and buy 6 or 7 different copies of a film dating all the way back to copies from the early 80s or even older to try and cobble together the best possible version of a film in picture and sound, because they can't leave things alone and they can't do the job right, and they don't give a damn about an archival presentation and an archival preservation of a film exactly as it was and is and was intended to be seen and heard. So again, as you can tell, this stuff gets me really infuriated, and this type of tomfoolery and this type of incompetence needs to end. Just do things correctly. Take the time to do it right. It doesn't cost you anything else to do a job properly, and you shouldn't charge people full retail price. In fact, more than what you should be for a UHD set like this. And, expect people to just live with errors once again, and errors this glaring. So That's why I decided to give it a separate video. And another little bit of food for thought. Totally understandable you can't have the fabled original cut of Superman 4, but is there any reason why the two extended scenes in the international version that you can only see on the Japanese Laserdisc that did have finished effects, is there any reason why those are not included in an extended version of Superman 4 on this new release? I don't think anyone at Warner considered that. There's some more food for thought. I think that's another little example of how these corporations simply don't care about their libraries and their catalog titles outside of just trying to monetize them. So with that, unfortunately, very negative view of this. Those are simply my thoughts. You may not share the same opinion, but I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you picked up this new release, what you may like about it, what you may dislike about it, how you feel about these errors and problems. But this is just one of those moments where I'm so done with this type of incompetence and this lack of care about catalog films that I'm so fed up with this, and I think this is a key example where people should just say enough is enough, and please fix your mistakes, acknowledge your mistakes, and don't keep doing this type of shoddy work, because it doesn't help anyone, and it makes it very clear that you don't care, and you're also kind of insinuating that you think we're all stupid. We're not stupid, and there are some of us, like myself, who admittedly put way too much into researching films and trying to preserve films as best as humanly possible with, limited individual means. But it shouldn't have to be this way. And if we keep this going, it's just going to continue on and on and on. And eventually, you're just going to be the random, seemingly crazy person screaming in the wind. Well, but let's not get to this point. Let's actually take the time to acknowledge that things need to be done properly. It doesn't cost you anything. It may take a little extra time, but just do it right. Do it right the first time, and you don't have to do recall programs. You don't have to do additional work because you took the time to do the job correctly in the first place. That is the whole point of any of this. So with that, I hope my babblings on home video releases and film history have been at least somewhat informative. I'm sorry to be this negative and this frustrated, but I've just had it with this type of just complete lack of care and lack of quality control in regards to catalog releases from a lot of major studios. Not all, of course, but it's a problem that continues. It's always been a problem, but it just gets worse and worse and worse. And as time goes on and the focus is given more to streaming, it's just going to keep festering unless we start fixing it now. So I do encourage people to look deeply into this and to think about it if you're interested in purchasing the new Superman 4K release. Just think about if you want to support this type of work or not. And if they don't fix anything, maybe just wait and pick it up when it goes on sale, or pick up the individual releases, but definitely hang on to your 2018 UHD of the original film for the 70mm track. So again, just my unfiltered thoughts and frustrations, and I just had to put this out here in video form. I just felt the need to, because I'm just really beyond frustrated that this stuff continues to this degree, and that studios get away with it, and they just can act like nothing happened, and then these problems get baked into films, and then they get stuck that way for years, sometimes decades at a time. And with 4K perhaps being the last physical media format, they may be stuck this way ever after, unless you can get access to, vault sources yourself and restore the film yourself somehow, if they would ever let you. And that, from a preservation standpoint and historical standpoint, no film needs to suffer that. And unfortunately, many films have already and continue to. So this practice needs to stop, and people need to actually instigate quality control procedures and actually give a damn about the historical preservation and of films, and making sure that everything is done with an archival quality mindset. And as always, thank you ever so much for watching.